Hello everyone, I'm Ding Lei from Tencent News. As an automotive industry observer, I've always been thinking about how to better tell China's story and the story of automobiles and how to convey them to users in the most appropriate way. That's why I invited my old friend, Professor Zhu from Tongji University, to co-launch this podcast dialogue series. I think we should talk about joint ventures. This topic is especially relevant at this auto show. I happened to visit the Mercedes-Benz booth. I went to meet a colleague and by pure coincidence ended up having lunch with Mr. Duan from Mercedes-Benz. I remember we also mentioned this during the auto show. That lunch was actually a kind of historical coincidence because
of Mr. Duan's special situation, he happened to.
It just so happened.
Meeting him this time, it almost felt like a farewell meal.
It was the last public event lunch he attended as a representative of Mercedes-Benz. After that meal, he was supposed to officially leave on the 30th. The auto show was on the 24th or 25th, and on the 30th, he officially resigned. Then we talked about various topics. I said to him, hey, recently a media friend wrote an article asking whether Mercedes-Benz should give you enough respect. So when everyone went to greet him, I brought up this matter, and he said that someone had just come to greet him about it. He asked the other party to take it down, not to say things like that, because he didn't want to make such a high-profile exit. He didn't want it to be so high-profile. Then, on the day he left on the 30th, another friend of mine wrote another article, and that time it was actually Mercedes-Benz employees themselves who spontaneously came to bid him farewell. He was carrying a bag, and when he came out, there were many veteran Mercedes-Benz employees there to see him off. I think at that time, when I saw what my friend posted, there were probably 1 or 2 million people watching across various platforms. So I think maybe Mr. Duan is a very representative figure. He has achieved remarkable accomplishments and history at both Mercedes-Benz and BMW, and he can be considered a key figure in the joint venture sector. He really is a representative and a microcosm of the entire joint venture brand. Later, he left the company due to personal reasons. Then on the BMW side, the foreign representative in charge of management, if I remember correctly, it was Gao Xiang on the Chinese side, also changed to another person in January or February of this year. I happened to have a meal with him at that time, and we talked about this as well. So I asked him, well, what's your latest appointment? He said there isn't a clear appointment yet. They've just asked him to return to headquarters for now. This is probably just a change of the top domestic leaders at 2 of the main BBA companies. This might also be a reflection of their recent sales situation. So regarding the joint ventures, another situation is that at the auto show, BMW said they plan to launch 20 new models this year, and Mercedes-Benz seems to be planning to launch 40 new models over this year and next. This could be what you just defined as the so-called new forces.
Fresh.
The new forces. And this year or next year, they're going to make a big push over the next 2 years. Of course, this also includes some others. During the auto show, I also talked to some people, and now they're saying that before 2030, they also plan to launch about 20 new models. The new forces are also making efforts in this area. So, what's your view on the joint venture segment? What's the situation there?
Originally, when we talked about electric vehicles, when we talked about intelligence, usually we would mention Tesla. Then it was NIO, Xpeng, and Li Auto, right? So these are the new forces in this sector. So the earliest form in China, the new forces in intelligent new energy vehicles. Whenever we talked about them, it was NIO, Xpeng, and Li Auto. Later on, Huawei joined in as well. So now Huawei is also involved, right? Of course, it entered in a different way. Huawei entered in a different form, right? So Huawei is also considered a new force entering the entire vehicle industry chain. Then Leapmotor is also quite eye-catching, and Xiaomi is also very impressive. So these are what we used to consider as China's intelligent new energy vehicle sector. 6 new forces.
Right.
This year, suddenly, a large number of joint venture manufacturers have emerged.
Yes. This topic, this point you raised is really, really excellent because actually last year should have marked the 10th anniversary of the new car-making forces. Exactly 10 years.
Right.
And at that time, the milestone was Tesla entering China, which paved the way for Xpeng, Li Auto, and NIO.
Whether it's intelligence or electrification, I think Tesla really played a leading role.
Yes, absolutely.
And then over the past 10 years, Wei Xiaopeng and Li have really stood out. Huawei, Leapmotor, and Xiaomi, these 6 brands have been the most successful at making the transition. You could say they were the original new forces. So from last year to this year, including at this year's auto show, you can see that joint venture companies
Are the latest new forces.
They're the new hardcore new forces.
At first, we thought people would stop talking about these new forces since it's been over a decade. This year marks the 11th anniversary. The companies that were supposed to mature have more or less matured, so at this year's auto show, people rarely mention those from the past.
But if you look at Toyota's BZ series and Nissan's N series, the N6, N7, and Aria 8 Cross.
Right.
Take SAIC Volkswagen's new models this year. If you look at the models, including their names like 8 Cross, 9 Cross, aren't these all naming conventions that originated in China? This is the case whether it's the model itself or how it's defined. They're all those big six-seaters. Yeah, boxy, large size, with features like a fridge, hidden surprises, big sofas, large battery packs, and long range. Yeah, even the way these models are named, isn't it all especially localized for China?
Very much tailored to China.
So that's my fourth impression.
Right.
Now let's talk about the influence of smart new energy vehicles in the Chinese market. Joint ventures. They've started to make a push. At least the Japanese and German brands have already begun to charge ahead.
Right, and they're also being defined as a new force.
Rising new force.
Power. So let's talk a bit more about these so-called new joint venture brands. What do you think of them, or which one do you have more confidence in?
For the Chinese auto industry, it should be said that it was through joint ventures that we began to catch up on modern automotive R&D and production processes, a kind of make-up lesson phase.
Yeah.
It took 30 years to build a complete automotive industry chain. Right, and then in the 1.0 era, it was all about gasoline cars, traditional fuel vehicles. We were in the learning and catching up phase. But when it comes to innovation in smart new energy vehicles, it seems like joint ventures haven't really played much of a role. So in this regard, I think they were a step behind. That they didn't realize how much of an impact new energy vehicles and intelligent cars would have on traditional vehicles. They didn't expect it to happen so quickly. Even in China, although our government has been promoting this, at first we thought the penetration rate would exceed 50% by 2035. But in reality, it's already close to that in 2024. By 2025, we'll have already surpassed that, right? So the Chinese government's push for new energy vehicles has actually achieved its goals 10 years ahead of schedule. In other words, the pace of development has exceeded the expectations of the entire automotive industry. As for joint ventures, when it comes to new energy and intelligence, in the past they relied on their brand and traditional fuel vehicles. They still dominated the Chinese market. So there was a bit of brand dependence. Since their cars were selling well, they didn't see the need to spend a lot of money on transformation. You have to understand, technological innovation requires sacrificing profits and making huge investments, right? Huge investments, but with relatively low returns. As you just mentioned, if I have to plan for several years, plan for 40 or 60 new models, this will inevitably make the financial statements look worse and worse.
The profit and loss in that area will become even more pronounced.
So this kind of prosperity comes at the cost of sacrificing profits. In the past, international brands, big brands, tended to focus more on this because as established companies and large manufacturers, they paid more attention to their financial statements.
They must answer to their owners.
Actually, if you look at companies like General Motors, most of their CEOs come from a financial background.
That's right.
That's why financial statements are their
lifeblood,
core KPI. So in this situation, for joint venture car companies during their 1.0 era, they actually did not treat the transformation to intelligent new energy and technological upgrades as a core KPI. But from the second half of 2025 to this year, we can see a change. Joint ventures are about to enter the 2.0 era, which means they need to catch up. The first aspect is R&D speed, and the second is the source of technology. For example, take Toyota's Bozi. In terms of technology, it borrows from GAC, New Energy's technology. And then, for example, SAIC Audi, not the four-ring Audi, but the one,
the English one.
That Audi uses its own platform entirely. As for the gold label Volkswagen that they're promoting,
Anhui,
Volkswagen Anhui, or VW Anhui, started using the CEA, China Electronic Architecture, around 2008 or 2009. They used Xiaopeng's Yes, they borrowed Xpeng Motors' architecture. The development cycle for the brand new electronic architecture was compressed to 18 months. So you can see that the German and Japanese brands have actually started to move. This is what you'd call hardcore China. They've made the R&D speed and even the naming of the models extremely localized for China. Previously, they had a saying,
which was in China for China, yes.
But when I talked with them, I hoped they would change it to in China. lying face down.
So the real question behind this is, why can't it be for China after in China?
China doesn't care about that anymore. In today's Chinese market, Chinese consumers are getting harder and harder to please. It's no longer enough to just have a logo or a brand to satisfy Chinese consumers' tastes.
So why is it okay to go forward?
If these big brands can't compete with Chinese brands in the international market, that's when they'll really have a problem. Losing this as the real main battlefield means that their market share in China has already been gradually declining, and this is already a fact. Now, by adopting some of China's new energy and intelligent technologies after turning to Chinese suppliers, they've caught up quickly. But even with this determination, they still can't regain the glory they once had in the Chinese market. So in the Chinese market, I think if they want to develop cars in China that are localized for China and expect to capture 7% or 8% of the market like they did back in the day with their brand power, there's just no way. You can see that these highly localized cars haven't achieved the expected sales.
So actually, it's because when it wasn't a core KPI at the time, their strategy lagged behind by 5 to 10 years.
Right?
And that's something they need to catch up on.
Yes. So for new cars, for these established international automotive giants, the cars they produce have instead become the new players in the market. When it comes to cars, it actually takes time for us to accept a new brand. So they also face this issue. Massive R&D investment will impact their financial statements. So this is a real test for the joint venture partners.
So looking at all these different brands, Japanese, German, and Korean, which one of them do you honestly think has the very best chance of truly breaking out, if any of them actually can?
German and Japanese brands.
Go on. Or
if I had to pick, I'd say I'm more optimistic about the Japanese and German brands.
Japanese brands are ahead?
Japanese brands are ahead. They're not saying much, but they've already started working on In China for the World initiatives. They might even export the new energy vehicles developed and produced in China back to Japan. At the very least, they need to secure the Southeast Asian market, because their Southeast Asian market has already been strongly
impacted by BYD. So
their way forward might be in China for the world, meaning R&D must be done in China, and the supply chain definitely can't leave China. If they leave China now, where will they get their power batteries? Currently, the global supply of power batteries is basically controlled by 4 companies: KTL, BYD, Korea's LG, and the 4th is Tesla. Tesla is a closed, self-sufficient industry, so their only options are KTL, LG, and BYD. So they have to rely on the Chinese supply chain. As for intelligence, it's either NVIDIA or China's Huawei and Horizon Robotics. Of course, when it comes to algorithms, there's also Momenta. So whether it's for electric vehicles or smart technology, their supply chain has to rely on China. In other words, China is their main market. Because in the Chinese market, no matter how good you make the car, it's very hard to turn a profit. Chinese consumers are already extremely picky, just too picky. So their best option might be to bring R&D into China, because R&D moves faster in China. For manufacturing, you have to rely on China's supply chain to keep costs under control. And third, they need to first consolidate their overseas markets.
So to sum up, the core of In China is that you can't do without China.
Right.
And the core of Forward is to go to China.
They've almost monopolized the new energy vehicle industry
chain.
And then, as for the intelligent and smart industry chain, it can compete with the US on equal footing, mainly because of Tesla. Actually, let's not talk about Tesla since it's a closed industry chain. So, when it comes to intelligence, I feel like the Chinese and American industry chains are still about half and half. Yeah, so for intelligent driving, there's NVIDIA. For smart cockpits, there's Qualcomm. Domestically, we have what we call the Huawei ecosystem, like the Dimensity line, DJI Joyu, and Momenta's algorithms. So in China, there are 4 industry suppliers to choose from. These, in the past, traditional car companies could only take the supplier route when it came to intelligentization, meaning it's not really possible for them to do what NIO, Xpeng, and Li Auto did. Basically, to follow Tesla's example and develop a fully in-house, end-to-end solution. That's just not realistic.